Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this video really is about the future of Billy Joe Saunders. But before we get into that, there has been an update in regards to the injury that he sustained in his bout with Canelo. According to Eddie Hearn, he's saying that Billy Joe Saunders suffered multiple fractures to his orbital bone in the defeat to Canelo, and he is currently having surgery today. He said that the injury is serious, and it is described as a quadripod fracture. I wonder whether Eddie Hearn will actually release the medical records to verify this, considering he was, insistent that Frank Warren released the medical records in regards to Daniel Dubois when he suffered his eye injury. That'll be interesting to see. But from this news, if it's true, quite a serious injury for Billy Joe Saunders. It's the type of injury that could possibly end a career, and even if a fighter comes back from that, potentially they will not be the same, physically or mentally. I mean, we saw Antonio Margarito, when he had his eye smashed up, he was never the same fighter after that, so this sort of injury is very serious. If Saunders is lucky enough to continue his career, he may not be the same fighter from this point in time. Also, on social media, the debate rages on whether Billy Joe Saunders quit or not. His trainer Mark Tibbs is saying that he pulled Billy Joe out of a fight, and basically that it was his decision. Even if it wasn't Mark Tibbs' decision, and Billy Joe decided to quit after that sort of injury, I've got no complaints. With an injury like that, I'm not going to hold it against a fighter. Same thing with Daniel Dubois. However, the criticism that Billy Joe Saunders is getting is definitely justified in my opinion, because when Daniel had his eye injury against Joe Joyce, Billy Joe Saunders was one of the fighters who was very critical of Daniel Dubois. In fact, Billy Joe Saunders actually said, "You could knock my teeth out, break my nose, beat my brain up, damage my eye, I'm not quitting." That's essentially what he said after the Daniel Dubois fight. Well, he was in a very similar situation, and that never happened. So listen, Billy Joe Saunders, he had his say on Daniel Dubois, and he wasn't all that sympathetic, so what's coming back on him right now? He can't really argue with it, to be honest. And obviously he also said that he would never quit, no matter what the scenario, but it looks like against Canelo, he was more than happy to be pulled out. So the criticism for Billy Joe Saunders, in my opinion, is justified. However, in the cold light of day, I don't really blame him for actually stepping out of that fight with that sort of injury, but he said certain things in the past about other fighters, so now he's got to get that criticism back. It is what it is. But as for the future of Billy Joe Saunders, I mean, first and foremost, like I mentioned earlier in this video, that sort of injury is obviously very severe, not only just for boxing and his career, but life in general. Who knows, maybe the eyesight in that eye is never quite the same again. Maybe it ends his career. First and foremost, he needs to get through that injury and fully recover. Don't rush it. Come back at his own time when he's healthy and fit. So that's the main thing for Billy Joe Saunders right now, is getting through this injury and coming back to a point where he can fight again. That's not a guarantee, obviously. Hopefully his eye is okay though, and it doesn't affect him outside of a ring. But let's say Billy Joe Saunders successfully comes back from the injury and he wants to fight again. Where does he go from here? What's his future in boxing? Well, first and foremost, I would like to say, and I was saying this before the Canelo fight, even before the Canelo fight was signed, I've been saying this for a long while, Billy Joe Saunders is a fat middleweight. He's a lazy middleweight. He is not a 168 pounder. At 168 pounds, to me, Billy Joe Saunders loses a lot of his natural attributes. Foot speed, hand speed, reactions. I'm not saying he's slow at 168, but to me, in comparison to middleweight, Billy Joe Saunders is slower. Mainly in regards to foot speed and reaction time. And when I say reaction time, I mean both defensively, when a shot's coming in, and also picking his own shots. His reactions are nowhere near as good at 168 as they were at 160. And listen, Canelo aside, Billy Joe Saunders is outsized at 168. You look at someone like David Benavidez, a much bigger guy than Billy Joe Saunders at 168. Even Caleb Plant is a much bigger 168 pounder than Billy Joe Saunders. He's just not a super middleweight as far as I'm concerned. And even if he sticks around at 168, who's there to fight? Caleb's going to fight Canelo, more than likely. Billy Joe's going to go nowhere near David Benavidez. So really, what else is there? A rematch with John Ryder? Doesn't exactly get the blood flow going, does it? So 168 for me, Billy Joe Saunders, if he wants to continue, 168 is not the division for him, as far as I'm concerned. If he wants to continue, I think Billy Joe Saunders should actually go back down to 160 pounds at middleweight and try and have some success there. One fight that makes sense, in my opinion, domestically at least, would be a rematch between Billy Joe Saunders and Chris Eubank Jr. If Billy Joe wants to come back, I think that's the ideal fight for him at 160. Obviously, these guys have fought before. There's a lot of history between these two guys. First fight was pretty good. You know, there's a lot of back and forth between Eubank Jr. and Billy Joe Saunders. It's certainly a fight that could be sold to the casual market in the UK, and it would generate some interest, no doubt about it. And, you know, for better or worse, Chris Eubank Jr. he's a lower level top 10 contender in the middleweight division. So if Billy Joe Saunders were to move down in weight, fight Chris Eubank Jr. and then beat him, he puts himself back in the title picture at 160 pounds. And obviously right now you've got guys like Gennady Golovkin, Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, Ryota Murata. These are the sort of fights maybe Billy could target if he were to beat someone like Chris Eubank Jr. at 160 pounds. But ultimately, the main takeaway for me is that Billy Joe Saunders, if he does come back, he needs to come back at middleweight, 160 pounds. For me, there's nothing for him at 168 in terms of fights, and quite frankly, he's not a 168 pounder physically. Certainly not in my opinion. I mean, when you look at Billy Joe Saunders' 168 run, has he had an impressive performance? I mean, go back and watch the fights. The fight when he won his world title at 168, the vacant title, against Shifa Isafi. He got buzzed in that fight and wasn't looking too good. Then you have the Martin Coceres fight in America. He was losing that fight until the stoppage. Then you had the Martin Murray fight, and yeah, I respect Martin Murray a lot, but at that point, Martin Murray was basically a corpse. He was shot to bits. Yeah, Billy Joe looked okay in that fight, but you're supposed to against that version of Martin Murray. So Billy at 168 has really flattered to deceive, in my opinion. And yeah, for me, he's a middleweight. But quite frankly, after this fight with Canelo, I've got a gut feeling that Billy Joe Saunders will actually retire after this fight. He made some decent money before this fight, and obviously the Canelo payday was huge, coming off a serious injury. I've got a feeling that Billy Joe will actually call it a day, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, share your thoughts below. Where do you see Billy Joe going from here? Do you want him to retire? Do you think he'll retire? And if you believe he'll come back, what route should he go down? Anyway, share your thoughts below. It's been your guy Delboy. Peace.